Good evening, gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, General Evaluator and friends. Tonight I'm going to speak about AfterBurn, not to be confused with, I think as the Chairman said earlier, misheard me, afterbirth, so it is AfterBurn, nor for any of the older gentlemen here to be confused with what might happen to you after you've consumed too much wine or other foodstuffs in a hurry of a late night. I am going to be talking about AfterBurn. I have my technical consultant over here, Mr. Prettyman, who I'm sure will keep me correct if I begin to speak any rubbish. But the subject tonight is AfterBurn, the process whereby extra fuel can be introduced into a jet engine to increase its thrust. Also known by Americans, our cousins over the ocean, as reheat. So who knows about jet engines? Thank you, Jim. For the rest of you, a jet engine is a cylindrical shaped object, such as this cup, carefully chosen from the back table. Air it comes into the front of the cylinder where a fan compresses it. It's then mixed with the fuel. It is ignited. As it ignites, it expands and it rushes out the back of the pipe. So front, back, out. And as it goes out the back of the pipe, it goes through a second turbine which turns. That second turbine at the back of the engine is connected to the fan at the front of the engine by a shaft, and you get into a continuous process whereby air sucked in, it burns, it goes out the back, it turns the shaft, that sucks more in, and so on. That's how a jet engine works, very basically. Jet engine invented, of course, by the Germans in about the late 30s. Whittle, is it that? Yeah. Whittle, was it?
Whittle, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think Henkel maybe.
Whittle was a little bit on it.
Okay. So that's a jet engine. Now, what we find with an afterburn is we introduce fuel into the exhaust after it's gone through that turbine at the back of the engine. We just dump more fuel in there, we ignite it, and we get extra thrust. However, it is not particularly efficient. So you might have to put in a lot more fuel, but although you gain extra thrust, you don't get as much thrust as you would like. So you might have to put in 80% more fuel, and yet you only gain 20% more thrust. Now that's 80-20 rule. Is not to be confused, of course, with Pareto, who is the Italian economist who identified in the 1800s that in Italy at that time, 80% of the land was owned by 20% of the population, which is a different ratio. That you may probably come across the 80-20 rule. Wasn't coined, that phrase, by Pareto himself. That was coined by a management consultant sometime later. Management consultants not to be confused with management. So the jet engine. We have the afterburner. Not commonly used in civilian aircraft. There are a couple of exceptions. It was used in Concorde and the Tupolev Tu-144. 144 is not to be confused with the square root of 12.
The square?
Well, it's not to be confused, is it? I'm glad you're paying attention. Concorde's actually a small town in Massachusetts with a population of about 2,500 people. But no other particular note. Concorde had 4 Rolls-Royce Sminka engines or something, no, I can't remember, some French-English consortium engine in it. It was a twin-shaft turbine, which is a bit unusual for a passenger plane, and it had afterburners on it. They were used in 2 phases of Concorde's flight. They were used during takeoff, and they were used to push the aircraft up through the sound barrier up to its maximum speed of Mach 2. You can always tell if a jet engine's got afterburn on because as you look at it, you get the shock waves out the back, the diamonds. You know, probably remember in chemistry. I guess you guys are all old enough in chemistry. You got to play with real Bunsen burners, and you get that diamond in the flame, the very hot part, that's sort of cone shape. That's the classic sign that an afterburner's been used because you'll get that flame right out the back of the jet nozzle too. Concorde, very noisy of course when it takes off with afterburn, and as you accelerate up towards through the sound barrier, you actually get a couple of pops if you're sitting in the air, or when it was still flying, if you sat in the aircraft. as they put on the afterburners, you actually got, it was like you getting shot in the back of the seat a couple of times as they came on. What else was I going to say? Yes, afterburners were also used in the Lightning, which is English Electric Lightning jet fighter. Interceptor, an interceptor in the true sense of the word. Ah yes, I remember what I was going to do with this one. If we have our chairman here now, interestingly, when they were trying to design the Lightning, they started off with a pilot. You just close your eyes, it might help if you young pilot sitting here in this chair. And they were trying to figure out how to arrange the engines behind him to reduce the frontal area of the aircraft. They came up with quite a novel approach of stacking two engines one on top of the other, because that was sort of more or less the shape of somebody sitting in a chair. Lightning had a very, very good power to weight ratio, because essentially all you had was this very slim frontal area, like John sitting in his chair, two engines behind him. But bugger all space for anything else, no space for fuel, not much space for weapons, not much space for anything actually. As a result, the aircraft was incredibly fast, could get to very high altitudes very quickly, even would beat an American fighter, the F-15. It was quicker to climb than an F-15. This came out of service in about the 80s, mid-80s.
Two Rolls-Royce engines.
Two Rolls-Royce
engines.
Two, yes, absolutely. But it had a range of about 200 miles. I think it was 800, but it was a tiny range. It was absolutely a useless range. But a true interceptor straight off the runway up to
Still
50,000
fly one in
feet.
South Africa.
They still fly them in South Africa, so there we go. Very useful if you're trying to, well, I don't know what it's useful for. So that was the Lightning. Of course, not to be confused with the sudden discharge of electricity from the atmosphere to Earth. All right, okay. Well, as you can probably tell, this was a speech without a beginning or an end. So we've come to the end of the speech now. So thank you very much.